Why coal-heated homes experienced quieter nights and fewer coughs than modern central heating systems. Coal-heated homes created a radically different indoor environment than what most people live with today, and that difference mattered most at night. For generations, families noticed that winter coughs often eased after dusk, sleep was deeper, and throats were less irritated by morning. This was not nostalgia or coincidence. It was the result of how coal heat behaved inside enclosed structures, how moisture moved through the home, and how air settled during the night. When central heating replaced coal fires, many of these unintended protections quietly disappeared. How radiant coal heat stabilized nighttime humidity instead of stripping it away. Coal fires produced radiant heat rather than forced air. Heat moved outward slowly from brick hearths, cast iron stoves, and chimney masonry. As the fire burned down overnight, warmth lingered in the walls, floors, and furniture instead of being abruptly shut off. This created a stable humidity range that protected airways during sleep. Central heating systems, especially forced air furnaces, rapidly dry indoor air by continuously cycling heated air through ducts. That dry air pulls moisture from the throat, nasal passages, and lungs, which increases nighttime coughing, especially among older adults. In coal-heated homes, folks would routinely keep water kettles near the hearth, dry their laundry indoors, and even rely on the masonry itself to release stored moisture gradually as it warmed up. These simple practices prevented the sharp drops in humidity that, well, modern heating systems tend to cause. Anyone today can take a page from this old playbook by prioritizing radiant heat sources like masonry heaters or oil-filled radiators, and by deliberately maintaining overnight humidity between 40 and 50% using passive evaporation instead of going for those aggressive mechanical humidifiers. Now, why did slow heat decay matter more at night than just the peak temperature? Well, coal fires were banked before bed, not put out completely. A properly banked fire would release heat slowly over, say, 6 to 8 hours. That meant temperatures declined gently through the night, instead of dropping suddenly at those furnace shutoff points. This gradual cooling actually reduced the airway shock that happens when warm indoor air turns cold and dry in just a short window. Modern thermostats, on the other hand, often create these abrupt temperature swings that can really irritate bronchial tissue, especially during REM sleep when your breathing patterns are changing. You know, historical heating logs and domestic manuals really emphasize consistency over intensity. Bedrooms were usually cooler than living rooms, but they were never actually cold. Folks made sure the chest and head stayed warm, while the air itself remained just a bit cooler and moist. Modern sleepers can actually recreate this effect by lowering nighttime temperatures only a few degrees, instead of doing those aggressive setbacks, and by avoiding direct airflow toward their beds. So, here's how chimneys and passive ventilation work to reduce nighttime irritants. Coal fires needed active chimneys, and those chimneys kept moving air even when the fire burned low. This setup created a gentle, continuous ventilation that removed indoor irritants without causing any uncomfortable drafts. Back then, smoke particles would rise, and fresh air would slip in through all those tiny leaks in windows and floorboards, so air turnover just happened naturally. But with central heating systems, homes are sealed up tight, and the same air gets recirculated over and over, which ends up concentrating dust, allergens, pet dander, and even chemical residues from furnishings and cleaning products. You know, night coughing often gets worse in sealed environments where irritants can really build up. Back in the coal era, homes sort of unintentionally avoided this problem because they were never truly airtight. For folks today, you can actually take a page from that by introducing some controlled passive ventilation at night. Maybe crack a high window away from your bed, or use a dedicated air exchange vent instead of just relying on your HVAC system to circulate the air. So here's why coal heat reduced dust movement during sleeping hours. Forced air systems, the kind most of us have now, are always stirring up dust. Every time that heating cycle kicks on, it lifts fine particles right into our breathing zones, and that's especially true near beds. Coal heat, on the other hand, didn't use any fans. Once the fire was settled for the night, the air in the house was mostly still. Dust would just fall instead of being blown around. This made a real difference for nighttime respiratory comfort, especially for children and the elderly. Historical cleaning routines really reflected this reality. Floors were swept during the day, fires were tended before dusk, and then nights, well, they pretty much remained calm. To replicate this today, avoiding overnight fan operation, minimizing airflow in sleeping spaces, and using radiant heaters rather than ducted heat can significantly reduce nocturnal coughing caused by particulate irritation. How coal-heated bedrooms prioritize layered warmth instead of heated air. Coal-era sleep depended on body insulation rather than air temperature. Heavy wool blankets, layered bedding, and even bed curtains kept warmth close to the body while allowing the surrounding air to remain cool and moist. You know, warm air dries the throat while warm bedding does not. This distinction is, well, pretty critical. Central heating, it kind of reverses this logic by overheating the air while folks sleep under thin covers. The result is, honestly, dry nasal passages and reflex coughing. So, applying this older method today means lowering bedroom heat using natural fiber bedding and insulating the sleeper rather than the room. Wool and cotton, you know, they really do regulate moisture far better than synthetic materials. Plus, they help reduce airway dryness during the night. So, why didn't coal smoke exposure cancel out these benefits indoors at night? Well, while coal smoke was definitely a real problem outdoors and during those firing periods, nighttime exposure indoors was actually pretty minimal when fires were properly banked. By the time folks headed to bed, combustion was low, flues were drawing upward, and indoor air tended to be cleaner than it was during the day. A lot of modern cough sufferers assume older homes were constantly smoky, but if you look at domestic records and health observations, they suggest nighttime air was often calmer than in today's sealed, chemically dense interiors. So, the lesson here is not to romanticize coal, but really to understand combustion timing. Any heating system today that burns fuel should be stabilized well before sleep, avoiding late-night firing or cycling that introduces irritants during rest hours. What this really teaches modern preppers and historians about resilient home design is pretty interesting. Coal-heated homes accidentally solved problems that, honestly, our modern systems kind of created. Stable humidity, slow heat release, passive ventilation, minimal air movement, and body-centered insulation all contributed to quieter nights and, fewer coughs. These principles, they remain applicable regardless of your fuel source. Preppers designing off-grid homes, historians restoring period houses, or anyone out there seeking respiratory comfort can adopt these strategies without having to return to coal itself. Understanding why those older systems worked really lets us design better modern ones, for sure. The past, it doesn't need to be copied, but it sure ought to be studied carefully and applied intelligently. If this kind of grounded, historically accurate analysis matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles, share this guide with your fellow researchers and survival-minded viewers, and help keep this knowledge alive right where it belongs.